Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. Have you ever felt like love was never meant for you until someone saw the parts of you no one else dared to look at? Tonight's story will wrap around your heart like a quiet melody. Settle in. Let's begin. Morning light drifted gently through the pine trees, casting golden streaks across the worn stone steps that led to a little wooden cottage tucked deep in the forest. Birds chirped softly through the lingering mist, and the scent of toasted bread floated out from a window slightly ajar, where Elena Moore once sat with her parents, reading old books and quietly dreaming up a world of her own. That place had once been home, a place where love didn't need to be spoken aloud, where a 15-year-old girl with wide, curious eyes was cradled in her father's warm embrace and lulled to sleep by her mother's humming in the twilight. Her father was a literature teacher, her mother a painter. They raised Elena with stories and soft kindness, the kind that would forever echo in her memory. Until one winter night, the fire started in the living room, devouring the house in less than an hour. Elena was the only one who made it out. Pulled from the wreckage, her eyes wide with shock and her heart drowning in grief, her mother's voice calling her name through the smoke was the final thread that tied her to the world she lost. From that moment on, she was no longer a carefree child. With no close relatives left, Elena was sent to live with George and Linda Moore, an uncle and aunt she barely knew. From the moment she stepped into their home, she felt it. She wasn't welcome. And just like that winter brought not only snow, but the quiet end of everything Elena once called home. The years that followed passed like a cold, endless river. Inside the grand but hollow house, Elena grew up quietly, like a wildflower pushing through dry, cracked earth. No one asked her what she ate, what she dreamed of, or how she felt. To Uncle George and Aunt Linda, she was never family, just an obligation they begrudgingly bore. She spent most of her time in the small attic room, where sunlight only visited for a few brief hours each day. It was there she wrote. Words filled the empty spaces in her heart. They were her voice in a world that never listened. Time moved on, and Elena became heartbreakingly beautiful. Her fair skin shimmered beneath the fading light, and her wide blue eyes held the stillness of a windless lake, framed by soft waves of golden hair. There was gentleness in her features, but not fragility. A beauty shaped by sorrow, yet untouched by bitterness. And it was that beauty that made her a pawn. One autumn evening, as wind howled through the window panes and darkness wrapped around the house, Elena heard whispers behind a closed door. Uncle George's voice was low and sharp, like a blade. We can't keep her forever. If Dominic Blackwell agrees to marry her, our debts will vanish. That name, Dominic Blackwell, Elena had heard before. A famous author turned publishing magnate, widowed, 48, wealthy, powerful, and deliberately detached from the world. They didn't ask for her opinion. They didn't care how she felt. To George and Linda, Elena was nothing more than a transaction. And now, it was time to cash in. That evening, they called her down to the dining room. No glowing chandelier, no warm candlelight, just a dim yellow bulb overhead and two stone-faced people waiting. Dominic Blackwell had agreed to marry her. The wedding was set for 3 weeks from now. Aunt Linda was already waiting with a frozen smile. Congratulations, Elena. You're getting married. Elena froze. I don't even know him, she managed to whisper, her voice shaking like dry leaves in wind. You don't need to, George cut in coldly, his gaze like steel. You owe us a great deal, Elena. Food, education, a roof over your head. None of that came free. Linda sat upright, her lips pressed tight as if enduring a great inconvenience. You should be grateful. Dominic is a man most women would dream of marrying, wealthy, powerful. He'll provide for you better than anyone ever could. But Elena didn't care about wealth. All she knew was that she was being pushed into a marriage without love, without freedom, without choice. Dominic Blackwell, a man nearly twice her age, once married, praised by the world yet feared for his power, was to be her husband. She bolted from the room, the door slamming shut behind her like the world had just closed in forever. She collapsed to the floor, her heartbeat frantic, breath short and sharp. No one stood beside her. No one heard her. 3 weeks. It was too short to escape, too long to live in quiet terror. Each night after, she stared at the ceiling, picturing Dominic's face like a shadow without detail, and her heart clenched painfully every time the word wife echoed in her mind. 3 weeks later, the sky was blanketed in thick gray clouds. Sunlight couldn't pierce the gauzy curtains of the room where Elena sat in silence. Her face had been carefully made up. Soft pink lips, mournful eyes. Her long hair was swept into a low bun, adorned with tiny pearl pins that shimmered faintly, as if someone were trying to make her look like the perfect bride. But inside, she felt like a girl being prepared for her own funeral. The wedding dress clung to her slender frame, soft lace cascading down like cold, pale petals. Clutching the bouquet tighter than necessary, she took slow, heavy steps as the cathedral doors opened. On either side were strangers, guests, who came not for her, but for the name of Dominic Blackwell. And then she saw him. Dominic stood at the end of the aisle, tall in a perfectly tailored black suit. His face was calm, his gray eyes like polished marble, cool, unreadable, and quietly intense. He didn't smile. He didn't soften. He simply stood in silence. Elena moved forward, each step winding her chest tighter. When she reached him, she didn't dare look up. The priest began to speak. "Elena, do you take?" The words echoed like a voice from another world. It didn't feel like a question. It felt like a sentence. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. Behind her, George's gaze was an iron blade. And then, so softly that only he could hear, she whispered, "I do." Dominic said nothing. He simply slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand warm, his touch steady and disarmingly calm. When he leaned in, his lips brushed her cheek. No more, no less. As applause rippled through the crowd, Elena felt nothing, just a hollow stretch of silence inside her chest. She didn't know then that this delicate, non-possessive kiss would be the first thing to make her wonder. Was Dominic Blackwell truly the monster she feared? Dominic's estate sat on the edge of an ancient forest, surrounded by towering trees and winding stone paths that led to a wide courtyard paved in white gravel. It wasn't the kind of mansion Elena had imagined. Not opulent, not grand, but quiet, almost mournful. From the moment she entered, it felt like a different world, where sounds softened and time moved slower. The staff were polite, discreet. Dominic didn't force her to do anything. He simply placed a guiding hand on her back as she stepped out of the car and said gently, "The room at the end of the hall is yours. Rest as much as you need." Elena was stunned. There was no extravagant wedding feast, no fiery wedding night as she had feared. Dominic didn't knock on her door, didn't touch her, didn't even try to speak unless she initiated it. And yet, the silence unnerved her. Every morning, outside her door was a cup of warm ginger tea. Beside it, a small cookie, the kind she had once mentioned liking in passing to the housekeeper. One day, she discovered a brand new leather-bound notebook in her drawer. On the first page, a single line in neat handwriting read, "Write it down if you find it hard to speak." The words weren't poetic, but they were deliberate and quietly intimate. Elena started to realize that Dominic wasn't exactly who she had imagined. He had a private office with floor-to-ceiling shelves and worked late into the night, often with the light still on at 2 a.m. One night, when she crept into the kitchen, she saw him sitting alone on a long chair by the window, an old book in hand, his eyes distant. She turned away quickly, but the image lingered in her mind. Maybe he wasn't as heartless as she'd once thought. The nightmare came without warning, like a storm. Elena woke with a jolt in the middle of the night, her breath rapid, her skin drenched in cold sweat. The room was dim, moonlight leaking through the curtains, casting pale, scattered patches of light across the walls. Her heart pounded heavily, and the echoes of the past rang in her ears. The explosion, the crackling fire. Her mother's voice screaming her name through the smoke. She hugged her knees, trembling in her thin silk nightgown. Years had passed, but the memory of the fire still returned sometimes, violent and sudden, like a wild beast. The door suddenly opened. Elena looked up, her eyes filled with panic, and met the tall shadow standing at the doorway. Dominic. He didn't say anything. He simply stepped in, quietly sat down on the edge of her bed, and his gaze was softer than ever before. Was it a nightmare? His voice was low, hoarse, but as gentle as the night breeze. Elena nodded. She couldn't speak. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Dominic didn't touch her. He just sat there silently. Then he said, "I've had them too, dreams I couldn't control, and voices that never go away." For the first time, Elena looked him in the eye, not as a powerful man, not as a stranger, but as a human being, someone who was also lonely, who had also lost something. The silence between them was no longer tense. It became something soft, something they could breathe in together. Dominic stood up slowly. Before leaving the room, he left her with one sentence. "You don't have to be afraid of me, and you don't have to pretend to be okay with me." As the door closed gently behind him, Elena was still trembling, but for the first time she felt her heart ease. Not from fear, but from something else entirely. Elena didn't know what compelled her to step out of her room that morning. Maybe it was the gentle light slipping through the door, or maybe it was curiosity about the man she had once feared. She found Dominic in the library, a room wrapped in floor-to-ceiling bookshelves like ancient walls. He sat at an old wooden desk, pen in hand, eyes following the lines of a page. Dominic looked up when he saw her, not surprised, not guarded, just a quiet, warm gaze. "Elena," he said her name for the first time, his voice low and soft like the turning of a page. "Good morning." She walked closer, her fingers twisting nervously, heart pounding faster than it should. "I just wanted to thank you. For the notebook, for the tea, for last night." Dominic gave a small nod, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to thank me, but I'm glad you did." In that moment, Elena no longer felt like a prisoner in a forced marriage. She felt like a person, seen, heard, and in Dominic's eyes, there was no claim, no demand, only one thing: patience. The night sea was like a sheet of black silk, stretching endlessly toward the horizon, the waves gently brushing the shore like whispers that never ceased. Moonlight bathed the water in silver, casting the figures of two people walking side by side, quietly, unhurriedly, with no destination but simply being together. Elena walked barefoot, her fingers occasionally grazing the wind. She didn't speak, but inside her was a calm silence she had never known. Dominic stopped. She did too. He turned to her, his eyes bathed in soft light, reflecting a soul that was quiet, layered, and waiting for someone brave enough to step inside. "I don't want you beside me out of obligation," he said, his voice husky yet warm. "I don't want to bind you with gratitude or fear." Elena looked at him. "Then, what do you want?" she asked, softly. Dominic took a deep breath. "I want you to choose me, when no one is forcing you, when it's your heart that calls my name." She froze, not because of the words, but because of the truth rising in her chest. She was no longer afraid, no longer uncertain, and no one had ever waited for her like he had. "I think I'm ready," Elena whispered. "Not for anyone else, not because I have to, just because I want to." One step, then another. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the fabric. "I choose you, Dominic. I want you." He said nothing. He just pulled her into his arms, gently. And that night, they came together not because they were lacking, but because they were full of trust, of choice, of a love quietly blooming after everything they had lost. One quiet afternoon, Elena entered Dominic's study and found him sitting at his desk, holding a sleek black envelope in his hands. He looked up, his eyes always seeing more than she meant to show, locked onto hers. "I have something I want you to keep." Elena hesitated as she took the envelope. Inside were legal documents, already signed. Her name was listed under sole owner of Blackwell & Co. Publishing. She stared, stunned. "Dominic!" He stood, walked over to her. "This isn't about money. It's not because you need it. It's because I need you to know you can leave whenever you want. No strings, no chains, no guilt." His voice was steady, like a promise carved in stone. "I love you enough to let go if that's what you choose." Tears filled Elena's eyes before she even realized it. But she didn't look at the papers. She looked at him, the man she once feared, now the only person who had ever truly seen her, trusted her, loved her without conditions. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around his neck, and whispered through tears, "I don't need freedom to leave you. I need it to know that staying means I love you." 3 years after the day Dominic placed freedom in Elena's hands, she was still there. Not because of promises, not because of the papers he once signed, but because her heart had chosen him and continued to choose him, quietly and surely every single day. The house by the forest was no longer just theirs. Laughter now echoed through the stone hallways that once held only silence and solitude. Twin girls, Aurora and Celeste, were born on a soft spring morning, bringing with them all the light Dominic never believed he would deserve. The way Elena looked at him as she cradled their daughters told him everything. No matter what he had once lost, now he had it all. Their life was simple. Small meals by the window. Afternoons spent raking golden leaves together. Sleepless nights with crying babies in their arms. But it was real, and it was beautiful. Elena had once believed love was distant. But each morning, as she woke to the sound of Mama and the warmth of Dominic's arms around her, she knew the most precious thing in life isn't what we gain. It's what we lose and somehow find again. Sometimes the most beautiful homes are not made of walls, but of hearts that choose to stay. If this story touched a quiet corner of your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Noah's Stories. Your support helps us keep bringing these soulful tales to life. And hey, leave a comment below. Have you ever found love in the most unexpected place?